I just add one point?
Yeah, why don't I give you each a minute, 30 second
I would
rebuttal.
just like to ask Dr. Makhijani, do you not accept and recognize the fact that nuclear energy today, never mind these wild predictions of the future, which we can't, it's no use debating about predictions really, because you don't know whether, I can't prove that what's going to happen in 2050, but I can prove that right today, over 70% of the clean electricity in the United States, that is the non-carbon emitting electricity, is nuclear electricity, and less than 5% is all the little things put together, like the wind and the solar and the geothermal. So is that not the case today?
Well, you know, I'm one of the few environmentalists who actually battles the environmental community in having them recognize that nuclear is not a zero CO2, because everything we do has a CO2 imprint so long as we have coal in the system, but a low CO2 system, just like wind and solar. And I really would like to correct you. You are listening to some generic environmentalist and not to me. When I said 7,500 megawatts of wind, I did my math and I said it's equivalent to 2.5 nuclear power plants. I already divided by 3. So you weren't listening to me, but saying you have to divide by 3 because you brought some generic environmentalist. I'm an engineer first, and I speak in that capacity, that I am advocating a reliable and more secure electricity system than the one we have today, which is proliferation prone, and the French one is more proliferation prone than the one we have.
All right. Why don't we throw it open to questions from the audience for the last 15 minutes? And again, we'll try to keep it just to credentialed media and give you each a minute and a half to respond. So, and please say your name when you ask the question.
I'm Jim Landers of the Dallas Morning News. Dr. Moore, how do you build nuclear in a deregulated market without running into competitive cost problems?
Competition from what?
Competition from other power providers. If you have cost overruns with nuclear, who's going to eat them?
Oh, that's a different question than the first one you asked, I think. Are you asking me who's going to be responsible for cost overruns?
Can you build nuclear without cost overruns? Let's put it that way.
You can if you estimate the cost properly in the first place. And clearly the power consumers are the ones who are going to pay for this in the end, as they do everywhere. Sometimes government subsidizes power, but that's just taking taxpayers' money out of one pot and putting it in another. The fact is we end up paying for the electricity. And it is also a fact that it's cheaper to build gas and coal plants than it is to build nuclear plants. And unless we do have some kind of effective cap or tax or whatever on carbon, there will still be, as there is in China and many other countries, a tendency to favor building coal plants because they're cheap and dirty. And they don't have to pay for their emissions into the atmosphere, whereas the nuclear industry contains its emissions successfully and pays for that. As a matter of fact, Yucca Mountain is already completely paid for, and all that money came from a 1/10 of a cent per kilowatt hour tax on nuclear energy, and there's a $30 billion fund just sitting there to pay for all of the other aspects around nuclear fuel management. So I personally think the nuclear industry is on good standing financially. It is true that things change and all these materials that have skyrocketed, the commodities, cement, steel, and everything went skyrocketing up, and oil, and now they come plunging back down. It's pretty hard to predict the future when you're dealing with that kind of volatility. Maybe some of these big numbers that were being quoted for nuclear plants are now 30% less because all these commodities have come down in price so far. I don't know. And what can we assume for 5 years from now? I don't know. But I just do know that nuclear is a competitive technology.
Time.
The repeated I don't knows are exactly the problem with nuclear. Today, electricity use is less than it was last year. And as I said, this is what happened in the last energy crisis. We had a lot of nuclear power plants ordered after October 1973, and none of them was completed. And the independent generators, if they get loan guarantees, would not be bearing the risk. At least 80% of the risk would be borne by the taxpayer. My estimate, my estimate of the risk of default under the present circumstances is that the risk of default is very high. I don't have a good number for you. If there's a carbon tax or something like that, all renewables as well as nuclear will be more economical than they are today relative to coal. But I think the 10-year lead time is a gap that's very hard to overcome. Everybody who's looked at solar technology acknowledges that the costs of solar are going to come down under 10 cents. My estimate is that nuclear power plants are likely to be uneconomical lemons before the first ones come online. That's why the independent generators like NRG and Exelon who've come to Texas don't actually want to put up any of the money themselves. They want the taxpayers to put up that money. The ratepayers aren't going to be paying if there's competition. T. Boone Pickens wants to build wind turbines. He didn't go out there asking ERCOT to build transmission lines from nuclear power plants to the consumer. He went there to ask ERCOT to build transmission lines from wind energy zones to the consumer.
Time's up.
Well, you know, T. Boone Pickens is building wind farms, or he was going to until recently.
Well,
he's building them so he can get the fat government subsidies to build them, and then have a whole pile of...
Nuclear has fat government subsidies. Why doesn't Wall Street finance them?
Well, the wind and solar are so much more heavily financed or subsidized than nuclear, 24 times the amount per kilowatt hour produced than nuclear. That's government report. But what T. Boone Pickens wants to do is fill in the gaps in the wind, which is 2/3 of the time, with his natural gas. So it's a great deal for him because he has gas and wind then and controls the system.
Well, this is how the American system works. You generate a product. I did not say carbon free. I have to have some response to him because he got an extra time. Should be fair. I did not say we're going to get rid of natural gas overnight. You do have to listen to what's being said. We're going to phase out fossil fuels over 40 years. Natural gas is a very critical bridge fuel. Combined cycle natural gas plants have only 1/3 the carbon footprint of coal. Not that far from nuclear and so on today, the way with gaseous diffusion plants. The critical thing is nuclear has production tax credits, the first 4 plants. Wind has production tax credits, but Wall Street is financing wind, and we built 7,500 megawatts, equal to 2.5 nuclear power plants this year. No nuclear.
That's good. Other questions?
Hi, I'm Michelle Lerner with EIR, Executive Intelligence Review. My question is actually about something that is often neglected in these discussions, energy flux density. One of the advantages of nuclear that I don't think you can get anywhere else is that you can actually generate heat which is sufficient to do things like desalination of water, processes, scientific, technological processes that require intense amounts of heat to even just do experimental work depends upon that source of power. So if we're actually going to continue to make breakthroughs in science and technology, and in fact, all of this will be leapfrogged if we actually develop fusion technology, but it needs the research to be able to do it. So my question is, how would you address that? Because we do need to continue to make breakthroughs in science and technology no matter what we use.
Okay, I got my PhD in fusion in 1972 from Berkeley. And it was 30 years away to scientific feasibility then, and it's 30 years away now. So, you know, it would be nice if we could have it, but I'm not counting on it saving us any day now. Desalination can be very well carried out without nuclear power. In fact, I don't think there's any nuclear power plant that's actually doing desalination anywhere, although some have been proposed. High temperatures can be produced. You know, Archimedes knew that you could burn up enemy fleets by focusing sunlight on them. You ever tried an experiment with a magnifying glass, try to burn paper? Solar energy is very hot. We've got a free thermonuclear reactor up there. It's all fusion energy. It's coming. We need to do the investment to collect it. And you can collect it at varying temperatures, including more hot than any materials could tolerate. So there is absolutely no problem with generating heat. Sticking radioactive rods inside a kettle of water has been glamorized since the Atoms for Peace speech. It's not a sensible way to boil water. That's all a nuclear reactor is. And I do not, for the life of me, understand why everybody wants one of these things.
Okay,